Greetings to all. Welcome to Quiet Soul Insights channel, a place where you find yourself falling asleep while listening to ancient history. Tonight, we're going to climb mountains. Not physically, of course, in your imagination. In your mind's eye, we're going to visit some of the most sacred places on Earth. Mountains that reach toward the sky. Mountains where for thousands of years, people have climbed seeking something. Seeking God. Seeking peace, seeking enlightenment, seeking themselves. These mountains exist. Real places, real rock and snow and wind. But they're more than geography. They are sacred. And we're going to explore them together, gently, with no hurry at all. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, then I welcome you to like, subscribe, and share these videos. It helps others find their way here. Now, imagine for a moment standing at the base of a mountain. You're looking up and up and up. The peak disappears into clouds. The air is cool, clean, silent except for the whisper of wind. And, somehow you know that this place is special. That countless others have stood where you're standing. That something sacred dwells here. We're going to learn about these mountains tonight. We're not going to rush, not going to cram information. We are just drifting through stories, through history, through the spiritual significance these peaks have held for humanity across millennia. Some facts will be about Buddhism, some about Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, indigenous traditions. All beautiful, all pointing toward the same mystery, the same human longing to touch something greater than ourselves. Let's begin at the very beginning with the first sacred mountain. The first time a human being looked up at a peak and felt it was holy. Here we go. Mountains have been considered sacred in virtually every culture throughout human history. From the moment our ancestors first gazed upward at towering peaks touching the sky, they recognized these places as different, special, closer to the divine realm. Archaeologists have found evidence of mountain worship dating back over 10,000 years. Making sacred mountains one of humanity's oldest spiritual practices. Think about why this might be. Mountains rise above the ordinary world. They reach toward the heavens. They're difficult to access, requiring effort and courage to ascend. The air grows thin at their heights. The view expands until you can see for miles in every direction. Lightning strikes their peaks. Clouds gather around their summits. They seem to exist in two worlds simultaneously, rooted in earth but crowned in sky. No wonder our ancestors felt these places were where earth and heaven meet. The axis mundi, or world axis. The concept of the axis mundi, or world axis, appears across cultures. The idea that certain sacred mountains form the center of the world, the point where heaven, earth, and underworld connect. Mount Meru in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, Mount Kunlun in Chinese tradition, and various other peaks worldwide are each considered by their cultures to be this cosmic center, the anchor point of reality itself. These aren't meant as geographic centers, the actual middle of the planet. They're spiritual centers, the place from which the world unfolds, the still point around which everything else revolves. To stand on such a mountain, in the belief of these traditions, is to stand at the heart of existence, the point closest to ultimate reality. Different cultures identified different mountains as their axis mundi, but the concept itself that there exists a sacred center appears almost universally. The Mesopotamia. In ancient Mesopotamia, ziggurats were artificial sacred mountains built when natural mountains weren't accessible. These massive stepped structures were designed to create a mountain in the flat river valleys, allowing priests to ascend toward the heavens to commune with the gods. The Tower of Babel from biblical tradition may have been inspired by these ziggurat mountain temples. The Mesopotamians, living in flat river valleys, couldn't access real mountains easily. But the spiritual pull toward mountain worship was so strong that they built their own. Immense structures of brick and stone, rising in steps toward the sky. At the summit, a temple where priests would perform rituals, believing themselves elevated closer to the divine realm. These weren't just buildings, but theology made manifest. The belief that height equals holiness, that ascent brings one nearer to God. The Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus in Greece, standing at 9,573 feet, was believed by ancient Greeks to be the home of the 12 Olympian gods. This snow-capped peak, often shrouded in clouds, seemed to exist beyond mortal reach, a perfect dwelling place for immortal beings. Greeks didn't typically climb Olympus. It was too sacred, the domain of divinity alone. Imagine being an ancient Greek, gazing at Olympus from the valleys below, the summit almost always hidden in clouds, thunder and lightning playing around its peak. It would be easy, natural even, to believe that Zeus dwelt there, hurling his thunderbolts, holding court with the other gods. The mountain's very inaccessibility made it perfect as divine dwelling, separate from human world, yet visible, present, a constant reminder of the gods watching from above. The divine, living beings. In many indigenous cultures, mountains are not just sacred, but actually divine, living beings with consciousness, will, and power. The Maori of New Zealand regard mountains as ancestors. Many Native American tribes view peaks as living relatives. The Quechua people of the Andes worship mountains as apis, powerful spirits who protect communities and must be honored with offerings. This isn't metaphor or symbol to these cultures, but literal truth. The mountain is alive, has consciousness, can hear prayers and offerings, can choose to bless or withhold blessing. This understanding creates a relationship with mountains utterly different from viewing them as mere geology. When you approach a living, aware mountain, you come with respect, with offerings, with humility. You don't conquer such a mountain. You ask permission, you honor it, you recognize its power and presence. Mountain pilgrimage. The spiritual practice of mountain pilgrimage, traveling to sacred peaks as religious devotion, spans all major religions and countless indigenous traditions. These pilgrimages can take days, weeks, even months, involving physical hardship, danger, and sacrifice. The journey itself becomes spiritual practice, each step a prayer, each difficulty an offering. A pilgrimage to a sacred mountain isn't tourism. It's not about reaching the summit for bragging rights or beautiful photos. It's spiritual work, grueling, transformative work. Pilgrims walk for days or weeks, sleeping rough, eating simply, pushing through exhaustion and doubt. The mountain tests them, strips away comfort and ego, creates space for something deeper. By the time they reach the peak or the mountain's sacred shrine, they're changed. The journey has done its work. The mountain has given its teaching. Volcanoes and mountains. Many sacred mountains are volcanic, and the connection between mountains and volcanoes deepened their spiritual significance. Mount Fuji in Japan, Popocatépetl in Mexico, Mount Kilauea in Hawaii. These peaks that periodically erupt fire and ash seemed obviously to be seats of divine power, places where the Earth's inner fire breaks through to the surface. Think about it from the perspective of ancient peoples. A mountain that suddenly explodes, pouring molten rock and ash, shaking the ground for miles around. This isn't just geology, it's theophany, divine manifestation. The gods are speaking, showing their power. These volcanic mountains demanded respect, offerings, careful ritual observance. To live near such a mountain was to live in constant awareness of forces beyond human control, powers that could destroy but also create, as volcanic soil often proves incredibly fertile. Temples on mountains. The practice of building temples and shrines on mountains or at their bases appears across all cultures. These structures mark the mountain as sacred space, provide places for ritual and offering, and create human-divine meeting points. Some mountains have hundreds of temples, monasteries, and shrines built over centuries by different generations of devotees. These temples aren't just religious architecture. They're conversation between human and divine, built form of prayer and devotion. Each temple says, "This place is holy." We recognize it. We honor it. Over centuries, layer upon layer of devotion accumulates. A small shrine becomes a temple, becomes a monastery, becomes a vast complex. The mountain accepts these offerings, these structures of stone and wood and faith, becoming more densely sacred with each generation's contribution. Sacred mountains often mark boundaries between kingdoms, between territories, between the known and unknown. They serve as natural frontiers, but also as spiritual thresholds, liminal spaces where normal rules don't apply and where transformation becomes possible. To cross a sacred mountain range is not just geographic travel, but spiritual passage. Mountains as boundaries work on multiple levels. Politically, they're natural borders, difficult to cross, easy to defend. But spiritually, they're thresholds. You're one person on this side, potentially someone different on the other. The crossing changes you. The difficulty, the altitude, the beauty, the fear, all combine to create liminal experience, a between place where ordinary identity loosens and new possibilities emerge. Many spiritual traditions send seekers to mountains precisely for this threshold quality, this capacity to facilitate transformation. Buddhist sacred mountains. In Buddhism, sacred mountains serve as places for meditation retreat, monastery establishment, and pilgrimage. The Buddha himself meditated on mountains, achieving important insights in high places. This association continues through Buddhist history. Mountains as ideal locations for intensive practice, where the world distractions fall away and concentration deepens. Buddhist practitioners discovered that mountains naturally support meditation. The silence, the thin air that makes you more aware of each breath. The vast perspectives that help release small concerns. The physical challenge that tires the body and quiets the restless mind. Many of Buddhism's greatest masters achieved realization in mountain caves and hermitages, spending years in solitary practice, surrounded by rock and sky and silence. Mount Wutai in China, one of Buddhism's 4 sacred mountains, has been a pilgrimage site for over 1,500 years. This mountain complex in Shaanxi province contains over 50 monasteries and is considered the earthly dwelling of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Pilgrims circumambulate the mountain's 5 peaks, a journey that can take several days. Picture Mount Wutai, 5 peaks arranged like the petals of a lotus, each hosting temples and monasteries. Monks have lived here since the 1st century CE, creating one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited monastic complexes. Pilgrims arrive from across Asia, some walking hundreds of miles to prostrate around the mountain, to visit each temple, to receive teachings from resident masters. The mountain itself is teacher, its difficulty and beauty working on pilgrims' hearts, opening them to wisdom. Mount Amei in Sichuan, China, another of Buddhism's 4 sacred mountains, rises to over 10,000 feet and contains the first Buddhist temple built in China in the 1st century CE. The mountain is associated with Samantabhadra Bodhisattva and features a 71-meter high golden statue of this deity at its summit. Pilgrims climb the mountain's steep paths, some taking 3 days to reach the top. The ascent of Amei tests body and spirit. Stone steps, thousands upon thousands, winding through ancient forests, past waterfalls and cliffs, through zones of changing vegetation as altitude increases. Monkeys inhabit these forests, considered sacred, often approaching pilgrims for offerings. The journey demands persistence, patience, faith. Those who reach the summit describe transcendent experiences, cloudscapes at sunrise, the golden Samantabhadra seeming to float in mist, a sense of having truly ascended toward enlightenment. Mount Kailash in Tibet, standing at 22,000 feet, is sacred to 4 religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and the indigenous Bon tradition. Despite its spiritual significance to over 1 billion people, its summit has never been climbed. The mountain is considered too holy. To stand on its peak would be unthinkable desecration. Instead, pilgrims circumambulate its base, a circuit of about 32 miles that can take 3 days. Kailash is perhaps Earth's most sacred mountain. Its perfect pyramid shape, rising from the Tibetan plateau, seeming almost supernatural. Buddhists believe it's the earthly manifestation of Mount Meru, the cosmic center. Hindus identify it as Shiva's throne. Jains connect it to their first Tirthankara's enlightenment. Bon practitioners see it as the soul of Tibet. All agree. This peak is so sacred that climbing it would be sacrilege. The circumambulation, or kora, is pilgrimage enough. Walking a high altitude, oxygen depleted, the mountain's presence overwhelming, is profound practice. The practice of mountain retreat in Tibetan Buddhism often involves practitioners spending extended periods, 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days being traditional in isolated mountain hermitages. These retreats allow for intensive meditation practice free from worldly distractions, with the mountain environment supporting deepening contemplative states. Imagine committing to 3 years in a small stone dwelling on a mountain's flank. No leaving, minimal contact with the outside world, days structured around meditation, study, simple rituals. The mountain becomes your entire universe. Its moods, its weather, its wildlife, its silence. Many Tibetan masters credit such mountain retreats as essential to their realization. The intensity and isolation creating conditions where breakthrough becomes possible. The mountain holds you, tests you, teaches you, transforms you. Mount Fuji in China, sacred to Guanyin Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, is actually a small island mountain. Despite its modest size, it hosts over 30 temples and draws millions of pilgrims annually. The mountain's association with Guanyin connects it to themes of compassion, mercy, and the feminine aspect of enlightenment. Fuji's island nature adds to its sacred quality. You must cross water to reach it, a natural purification. The temples nestle among rocks and vegetation, some perched dramatically on cliffs above the sea. Pilgrims come seeking Guanyin's blessing, help with difficulties, protection. The mountain's smaller scale makes it accessible. You don't need to be a trained climber or in perfect health to visit. This accessibility reflects Guanyin's nature, compassion available to all, the mountain welcoming rather than forbidding. In Japanese Buddhism, mountain asceticism, Sengaku Shinko, developed into the unique practice of Shujendo, blending Buddhism, Shinto, and indigenous mountain worship. Shujendo practitioners, Yamabushi, spend extended periods in mountains, performing austerities, seeking spiritual power through physical challenge and communion with mountain deities. Yamabushi are mountain mystics, their practice deliberately harsh, standing under freezing waterfalls, fasting, walking for days with minimal sleep, exposing themselves to extreme weather. The mountains are their temple, their monastery, their guru. Through suffering and endurance, through direct encounter with nature's power, they seek enlightenment and spiritual strength. This isn't armchair philosophy, but embodied practice, where enlightenment is tested against cold, fatigue, fear, and the mountain's sometimes hostile conditions. Mount Hai near Kyoto, Japan, home to the Tendai school of Buddhism, has been a center of Buddhist practice since the 8th century. The mountain hosts over 100 temples and monasteries. Tendai monks perform the famous Kaihoji-yo, a 7-year practice where monks walk up to 52 miles daily on mountain paths, a total distance equivalent to circling the earth. The Kaihoji-yo is one of Buddhism's most extreme practices. For 1,000 days over 7 years, a monk walks mountain paths, stopping at numerous stations to recite prayers. The distances increase each year, culminating in walking marathon distances daily. Those who complete it are revered as living Buddhists. Many don't complete it, the challenge too great, the commitment too demanding. But those who do emerge transformed, their bodies lean and powerful, their presence radiating something earned through years of mountain practice. The concept of mountain Buddhism recognizes mountains as ideal settings for spiritual practice across Buddhist traditions. The altitude, difficulty of access, natural beauty, and separation from worldly concerns create an environment uniquely suited for meditation and realization. This explains why so many Buddhist masters throughout history chose mountain hermitages for intensive practice periods. There's something about mountains that strips away pretense, quiets noise, focuses attention. The difficulty of life there, harsh weather, limited resources, isolation, paradoxically creates freedom. Free from comfort and convenience, you discover what's essential. Free from social demands, you meet yourself directly. The mountain becomes mirror and teacher, reflecting your mind while offering its own wisdom of stone, weather, silence, and vast open space. Hindu sacred mountains. In Hinduism, mountains are seen as the natural abode of the gods. The Himalayas, whose name means abode of snow, are considered especially sacred, home to Shiva, Parvati, and other deities. These peaks are not just metaphorically, but literally divine dwelling places, where gods reside and where humans can potentially encounter them. The Hindu relationship with mountains is intimate and mythological. These aren't just impressive geological features, but the actual homes of deities, places where divine dramas unfold. Shiva meditates on mountain peaks. Parvati, daughter of the mountains, performs austerities on their slopes. The Ganges flows from Shiva's hair on mountain heights. Geography and theology merge. Every peak has a story. Every sacred site connects to divine narrative. Mount Kailash, sacred to Hindus as Shiva's throne and the center of the universe, has been a pilgrimage destination for thousands of years. Hindu pilgrims travel from India across difficult terrain to circumambulate this remote Tibetan peak. The journey is arduous, the altitude extreme, but completing the Kora around Kailash is believed to purify karma and bring spiritual merit. For Hindu pilgrims, reaching Kailash is life's culmination, a goal saved for and planned toward for years or decades. The journey from India involves crossing high passes, enduring altitude sickness, traveling through politically complex territory. But to walk around Shiva's mountain, to glimpse its perfect form, to offer prayers at this most sacred place, this is worth any hardship. Many elderly pilgrims make this journey, knowing it might be their last major undertaking, offering their remaining strength to this final pilgrimage. The practice of Himalayan pilgrimage includes visiting the Char Dham, four sacred shrines in the Indian Himalayas: Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, and Yamunotri. These high-altitude temples, accessible only during summer months when snow melts, mark source points of sacred rivers and connections to divine presence. Completing the circuit is considered spiritually powerful. The Char Dham Yatra tests pilgrims' devotion. The temples sit at elevations where breathing is difficult, where weather can turn deadly without warning, where landslides and flooding are common. Pilgrims travel by foot, vehicle, even helicopter in modern times, but the mountains demand respect regardless. Every year, despite the dangers, hundreds of thousands make this journey, seeking blessing, purification, proximity to the divine that dwells in these high, hard places. Aranakula, a single peak in southern India, is revered as a manifestation of Shiva in the form of fire. The town of Tiruvannamalai at its base hosts one of India's largest temples. Devotees circumambulate the mountain barefoot, a practice called Jarivalam, believing the mountain itself is a lingam of light, Shiva in mountain form. Aranakula's sacredness isn't about height, it's modest compared to Himalayan giants, but about identity. This mountain is Shiva, not Shiva's home or symbol, but Shiva himself in stone form. The great sage Ramana Maharshi lived at its base and spoke of the mountain as his guru. To walk around Aranakula is to walk around God, each step a prayer, the mountain's presence palpable, teaching silence and presence. The concept of tapas, spiritual heat or austerity, is often practiced on mountains in Hindu tradition. Ascetics retreat to mountain caves and peaks to perform extreme practices. Fasting, exposure to elements, intensive meditation, yoga practices. The mountain environment intensifies tapas, creating conditions where spiritual breakthrough becomes possible. Hindu ascetics have used mountains for millennia as laboratories of transformation. In Himalayan caves, yogis sit in temperatures that would kill ordinary people, generating inner heat through meditation. On mountain peaks, they stand exposed to wind and cold, training the mind to transcend bodily discomfort. These practices seem extreme, perhaps mad from outside, but within Hindu tradition, their methods, rigorous, demanding methods for burning away ego, purifying consciousness, achieving realization. Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain of Hindu cosmology, forms the center of Buddhist and Hindu universe models. Though not identified with any physical peak, Meru represents the axis around which all worlds revolve. It's described as unimaginably high, made of gold, home to gods and celestial beings. All physical sacred mountains are considered reflections or manifestations of cosmic Meru. Meru exists in mythological space, too high, too perfect, too laden with symbolism to be mere mountain. It's the spine of the cosmos, the pillars supporting reality, the stairway connecting lower worlds to heavens. Yet every sacred mountain partakes in Meru's nature, acts as window into that cosmic center. When you climb Kailash or Aranakula or any sacred peak, you're not just ascending rock, but approaching the cosmic center, touching transcendent reality made manifest in physical form. The Himalayan range itself is considered sacred as the Devabhumi, land of the gods. This isn't limited to specific peaks, but extends to the entire mountain ecosystem. Rivers flowing from Himalayan glaciers are sacred. Plants growing on Himalayan slopes have spiritual power. Even stones from these mountains are revered as naturally blessed objects. The Himalayas in Hindu consciousness aren't just mountains, but a sacred realm, a different order of reality where divine and earthly interpenetrate completely. To enter these mountains is to enter sacred space, to breathe blessed air, to walk on holy ground. Every aspect participates in divinity: the water, the stone, the flowers, the snow. This understanding creates a relationship of deep reverence, where the mountains aren't resources to exploit, but presences to honor. Many Hindu temples are deliberately built on mountains or hills to elevate sacred space and require pilgrims to ascend, making the journey to temple a physical and spiritual climb. The effort of ascent becomes part of worship, arriving tired, breathless, having earned access through physical effort mirrors the spiritual work of approaching the divine. Think of temples crowning hilltops across India, Tola, Palani, Vaishno Devi, requiring hundreds or thousands of steps to reach. Pilgrims climb in heat, carrying offerings, chanting prayers. Children, elderly, sick, all make the climb, some carried by relatives or hired bearers. The ascent is purification, the difficulty in offering, the view from the top a reward both aesthetic and spiritual. The temple could be built at the base, but wouldn't mean the same. The climb matters, the elevation matters, the effort matters. The goddess Parvati, whose name means daughter of the mountains, embodies the Hindu understanding of mountains as feminine, generative, nurturing yet powerful. As Shiva's consort, she represents the earth principle complementing his transcendent consciousness. Their union, sky god and mountain goddess, reconciles masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, transcendence and immanence. Parvati's story involves her doing tapas on mountains to win Shiva's love. The mountain's daughter practicing austerities on mountain slopes, becoming so powerful through her practice that Shiva must acknowledge her. This mythology encodes deep teaching. Mountains are both setting for spiritual practice and feminine divine presence, both the stage where transformation happens and the power enabling transformation. To climb sacred mountains is to approach both Shiva, the goal, the summit, transcendence, and Parvati, the path, the mountain herself, immanent presence. Chinese and East Asian sacred mountains. The 5 great mountains of China, Wuyu, have been sacred for over 3,000 years, predating organized Taoism and Buddhism. These peaks, Tai East, Hua, West, Hung, North, Hung, South, and Song Center, were believed to be pillars supporting heaven and were venerated by emperors who made ritual ascents to communicate with heaven and legitimize their rule. Chinese emperors understood their authority as granted by heaven, and mountains, reaching toward heaven, were natural places to commune with celestial powers. The imperial ascent of a sacred mountain was an elaborate state ritual, the emperor climbing with full retinue, performing ceremonies at summit, reporting to heaven on the state of the realm. These weren't recreational climbs, but cosmic diplomacy, maintaining balance between earthly and heavenly realms. Mount Tai in Shandong Province, most revered of China's 5 great mountains, has been climbed by emperors for millennia. The mountain features over 7,000 steps leading to the summit. Inscriptions carved into rock along the path date back thousands of years, creating a vertical text of history, devotion, and poetry. To climb Tai is to walk through Chinese cultural memory. Confucius climbed this mountain. Emperors of every major dynasty ascended these steps. Poets came here for inspiration, their verses carved into stone. The path itself is museum, temple, history book. At night, pilgrims still climb by lantern light, continuing traditions older than most civilizations. The mountain has absorbed so much devotion over so many centuries that it feels saturated with presence, the stones themselves seeming to vibrate with accumulated prayer. In Taoism, mountains are seen as places of powerful qi, life energy, where the boundary between physical and spiritual realms is thin. Taoist immortals, Xian, are said to dwell on mountain peaks, and many Taoist practices aim to achieve the light body of these mountain immortals. Taoist monasteries on mountains serve as training grounds for adepts seeking immortality and spiritual power. Taoists understood mountains as concentrators of qi, places where life energy flows strongly, where spiritual practices yield more powerful results. In mountain monasteries, Taoist adepts practice internal alchemy, qigong, meditation, herbal medicine, all aimed at transforming the gross physical body into something more refined, more spiritual, ultimately achieving Xian status. Whether literally immortal or metaphorically transformed, these mountain practitioners embody Taoism's goal of aligning with the Tao, becoming natural as the mountain itself. Mount Huang, Yellow Mountain, in Anhui province became sacred to Taoists and later inspired countless artists and poets. Its distinctive granite peaks, often wreathed in clouds and mist, create scenes of otherworldly beauty. The mountain is said to be where the Yellow Emperor achieved immortality. Its aesthetic perfection made it ideal for contemplating Taoist principles of natural harmony. Huangshan's landscape seems painted rather than real. Jagged granite peaks emerging from cloud seas, ancient twisted pines growing impossibly from cliff faces, hot springs bubbling from rock, views of incredible beauty in every direction. Artists have tried for centuries to capture this beauty, poets to describe it, but the mountain itself exceeds representation. To visit is to understand why Chinese landscape painting developed as it did. Not fantasy, but attempt to capture reality this extraordinary. Mount Wudong in Hubei province is the center of Taoist martial arts. The mountain's temples and monasteries have trained martial artists for centuries, developing Wudong-style Tai Chi and other internal martial arts. The practice of martial arts here isn't primarily for fighting, but as moving meditation, physical expression of Taoist principles. Wudong's martial arts combine combat skill with spiritual cultivation. Practitioners train on mountain paths, practicing forms while climbing steep steps, meditating in mountain temples, absorbing the mountain's chi. The fighting techniques emphasize softness overcoming hardness, yielding that defeats force. Principles drawn from observing water flowing over mountain stone, wind bending trees, nature's patient power. The mountain is teacher, its lessons encoded in martial forms practiced for generations. Mount Fuji in Japan, standing at 12,389 feet, is sacred in both Shinto and Buddhist traditions. The volcano's perfect cone shape has made it a symbol of Japan itself. Climbing Fuji is pilgrimage practice, with millions ascending during the summer climbing season. The mountain represents purity, aspiration, and spiritual ascent. Fuji's form is so perfect, it seems unreal, more ideal than actual. For centuries, Japanese artists have depicted it, poets praised it, pilgrims climbed it. The ascent typically begins at night, climbers reaching the summit for sunrise. Watching the sun emerge from Pacific clouds while standing on Japan's highest point is experience of profound beauty and spiritual power. The mountain, though volcanic and potentially dangerous, offers blessing to those who approach with reverence. The practice of mountain pilgrimage in Japan often involves wearing white clothing, carrying staffs, ringing bells while walking. These practices mark the pilgrim as temporarily dead to ordinary life, undertaking sacred journey through liminal space. Many Japanese sacred mountains have circuits of 88 temples or shrines that pilgrims visit in sequence. The Japanese pilgrimage aesthetic differs from others. More structured, with specific protocols, designated paths, temple stamps to collect as proof of completion. But beneath the structure lives the same impulse, to walk, to climb, to offer your effort and devotion, to be changed by the journey. The white clothing symbolizes death. The pilgrim has died to ordinary concerns and been reborn into sacred time and space. Mount Kumano in Japan hosts the Kumano Kodo, ancient pilgrimage routes through mountain wilderness, now UNESCO World Heritage Sites. For over 1,000 years, emperors, aristocrats, and commoners have walked these mountain paths to reach 3 grand shrines. The journey through old-growth forest and over mountain passes is spiritual practice, the forest itself considered sacred. The Kumano Kodo offers something rare, wilderness pilgrimage mostly unchanged from centuries ago. You walk beneath massive cryptomeria trees hundreds of years old, across streams on stone bridges worn smooth by countless pilgrims' feet, past small shrines and sacred waterfalls. The forest silence, broken only by birdsong and water, creates contemplative space. Days of walking, simple accommodations, mountain beauty, all work together to open the heart, quiet the mind, create conditions for transformation. The concept of the mountain as a mandala, a sacred geometric representation of the cosmos, appears in East Asian Buddhism. Mountains are seen as three-dimensional mandalas, their peaks, valleys, temples, and paths creating a landscape that embodies spiritual teaching. Walking through such a mountain becomes meditation in motion, each step traversing sacred space that mirrors inner spiritual geography. This understanding transforms pilgrimage from journey to one specific goal into movement through sacred cosmos. Each temple represents different aspect of enlightenment. Each peak manifests different Buddha or Bodhisattva. The paths between them are the spiritual journey itself, made visible, walkable. The pilgrim doesn't just visit a mountain, but enters a mandala, participates in cosmic pattern, embodies the spiritual path through physical movement in sacred space. If you enjoy this, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Islamic and Middle Eastern sacred mountains. In Islamic tradition, mountains appear as sites of divine revelation and prophetic encounter. Several mountains are mentioned in the Quran as places where prophets receive divine messages. Mountains represent stability, permanence, and places where heaven and earth connect, making them natural settings for encountering the divine. The Quran speaks of mountains as pegs that stabilize the earth, preventing it from shaking. This geological poetry recognizes mountains' role in earth structure while elevating them to spiritual significance. Mountains are witnesses to creation, ancient presences that have stood since the beginning, making them fitting witnesses to divine revelation. Mount Sinai, Jabal Musa in Arabic, located in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, is sacred to all three Abrahamic faiths. Muslims revere it as the place where Moses received divine revelation. Christian hermits established St. Catherine's Monastery at its base in the 6th century, one of the world's oldest continuously operating monasteries. Jewish tradition identifies it as where Moses received the Ten Commandments. Sinai's stark desert beauty creates atmosphere of encounter with the absolute. Granite peaks rising from barren landscape, silence broken only by wind, night skies ablaze with stars. This is landscape of revelation, place where the ordinary world falls away and divine presence becomes palpable. Pilgrims of all three faiths climb Sinai, often at night, reaching the summit for sunrise, remembering Moses' encounter with God in fire and mystery. Mount Arafat near Mecca, though not high, only about 230 feet, holds immense significance in Islam. During the Hajj pilgrimage, millions of Muslims gather on the plain of Arafat on the 9th day of the Islamic month of Dhul Hijjah. The ritual of standing, waqf, on Arafat is considered the pinnacle of Hajj, commemorating the Prophet Muhammad's final sermon. The gathering at Arafat represents one of Earth's largest religious assemblies. Millions standing together, praying, seeking forgiveness, experiencing equality before God. Rich and poor, powerful and weak, all races and nations. Everyone wears simple white clothing, all equal on the plain before this modest mountain. The experience of such mass devotion, such collective spiritual focus, is overwhelming, transformative. For many pilgrims, these hours at Arafat become life's spiritual peak. Jabal al-Nur, Mountain of Light, near Mecca, contains the cave of Hira, where the Prophet Muhammad received the first revelation of the Quran. Muslims visit this mountain as part of pilgrimage to Mecca, climbing to the cave to pray and reflect. The mountain's name reflects the light of divine revelation that illuminated this place. The climb to Hira is steep, challenging in Mecca's heat. Pilgrims ascend slowly, contemplating Muhammad's retreat to this cave for contemplation. The night the angel Gabriel appeared to him, commanding him to read, thereby beginning the revelation that would transform world history. To sit in this small cave, looking out over Mecca, is to touch history's hinge point, to feel the presence of events that changed human civilization. In Sufi tradition, the spiritual journey is often metaphorically described as mountain climbing, ascending through stages of purification and realization toward ultimate union with the divine. Sufi masters use mountain imagery to describe the spiritual path's difficulty, the necessity of a guide, the sheikh as mountain guide, and the expansive view gained from spiritual heights. Sufis understand spiritual development as arduous ascent. You start in the valley, ordinary consciousness, ego-dominated, worldly concerned. The path leads upward, steep, demanding, sometimes dangerous. You need a guide who knows the route, who's made this climb before. Gradually you rise, the view expanding, until finally reaching the summit. Union with God, ego dissolved, consciousness transformed. The mountain metaphor captures the work required, the danger of falling, the glory of the summit view. Mount Damavand in Iran, the highest peak in the Middle East at 18,406 feet, appears in Persian mythology and Zoroastrian tradition as a symbol of resistance against tyranny and a dwelling place of divine forces. In the Shahnameh, Persian epic, the hero Feridun imprisons the tyrant Zahak on this mountain. Its volcanic nature adds to its mythological power. Damavand rises white and perfect above the Iranian plateau, its snow-covered cone visible for miles. Persian poets have written of this mountain for over 1,000 years, seeing in its symbol of Persian resilience, aspiration, and connection to divine realm. When Persians look at Damavand, they see not just geology but history, mythology, national soul. The mountain embodies something essential in Persian consciousness: proud, enduring, reaching toward heaven. In Druze tradition, which developed from Islamic mysticism, certain mountains in Lebanon and Syria are considered sacred. Mount Hermon, shared between Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, holds spiritual significance. Druze communities have historically inhabited mountainous regions, finding in these heights protection and proximity to spiritual truths their tradition holds secret. The Druze relationship with mountains is intimate and protective. Living in mountains provided refuge during periods of persecution, but more than safety, mountains offered space for their esoteric practices, their initiations, their preservation of secret teachings. Mountain villages became repositories of tradition, places where ancient wisdom could be passed down generation to generation, protected by both secrecy and altitude. The practice of khalwa, spiritual seclusion or retreat, in Islamic mysticism often takes place in mountain locations. Sufi practitioners withdraw to mountain caves or simple shelters for periods of intensive prayer, fasting, and meditation, following the example of the Prophet Muhammad's retreats to Mount Hira. These mountain retreats create optimal conditions for spiritual transformation. Sufi khalwa isn't escape, but intensive spiritual work. The practitioner withdraws to a cave, perhaps with minimal supplies, perhaps with a sheikh's guidance, to spend days or weeks in constant remembrance of God, dhikr, fasting, praying, stripping away everything but essential relationship with the divine. The mountain environment supports this work. Its silence, its removal from daily life, its association with revelation and encounter with God. The architectural tradition of building mosques and shrines on elevated locations, including hilltops and mountains, creates spiritual geography where believers ascend to pray. These elevated mosques symbolically reach toward heaven while serving practical purposes of visibility and call to prayer carrying across landscapes. The ascent to such mosques echoes the spiritual ascent of the soul toward God. Think of mosques crowning hills across the Islamic world. Their minarets visible for miles, their call to prayer echoing across valleys. The placement isn't accidental, but deliberate spiritual architecture, creating vertical dimension in religious landscape. To climb to such mosques for prayer adds physical dimension to spiritual practice, your body ascending as your soul aspires toward the divine, the effort of climbing becoming part of worship's offering. Christian sacred mountains. Mount Tabor in northern Israel is revered in Christian tradition as the site of Jesus' transfiguration, where he appeared in radiant glory before Peter, James, and John. The mountain's distinctive rounded shape has been a pilgrimage site since the Byzantine period. Churches crown its summit, marking this place of divine revelation. The Transfiguration story captures something essential about sacred mountains. They're places of vision, where ordinary perception falls away and deeper reality becomes visible. On Tabor, the disciples saw Christ's true nature, his divine glory breaking through human form. Every pilgrim climbing Tabor seeks similar vision, Not necessarily dramatic revelation, but glimpse of transcendent reality. Moment of seeing beyond surface appearances. Mount Athos in Greece, also called the Holy Mountain, has been an autonomous monastic republic for over 1,000 years. This peninsula mountain is home to 20 Eastern Orthodox monasteries and numerous hermitages. Access is restricted. Only men are permitted to visit, and entry requires special permission. The mountain exists as an entire landscape dedicated to prayer and monastic life. Athos is unique, a whole mountain range functioning as monastery. Its peninsular geography creating natural enclosure. Monks here maintain prayer rhythm unchanged for centuries. Long services in candlelit churches, hours of private prayer, simple manual work, radical simplicity of life. The mountain landscape, steep, forested, silent except for bells calling to prayer, supports this life completely. Visiting Athos means entering different time, different priorities, world organized entirely around prayer. The tradition of mountain monasticism in Christianity began with the Desert Fathers, but flourished particularly in mountainous regions. Mount Sinai, Meteora in Greece, monasteries in Lebanon and Armenia, all represent Christianity's understanding of mountains as ideal for contemplative life, places where worldly distractions fall away and focus on God intensifies. Christian monastics, like Buddhist monks, discovered mountains' natural support for contemplative practice. The difficulty of mountain life, harsh weather, isolation, physical demands, serve spiritual purpose, stripping away comfort and convenience that could distract from prayer. Mountain monasteries became schools of prayer, preserving contemplative tradition through centuries, their very existence testimony to human capacity for radical devotion. Meteora in Greece features monasteries built atop towering rock pillars, some accessible only by ladder or basket until modern times. These 14th century monasteries created communities suspended between earth and sky, their dramatic setting reflecting monastic aspiration to transcend worldly concerns and dwell as close to heaven as possible while remaining on earth. Meteora monasteries seem impossible. Churches and living quarters perched on vertical rock spires, accessible originally only through pulleys and nets. Monks chose these locations precisely because they were difficult, dangerous, isolating. The ascent to these monasteries, now by stairs carved in rock, once by rope ladder, is itself spiritual exercise, reminder that approaching the sacred requires effort, courage, willingness to leave comfort behind. Mount Patrick in Ireland, sacred long before Christianity and Christianized by St. Patrick's legendary 40-day fast on its summit, attracts hundreds of thousands of pilgrims annually. Many climb barefoot on the last Sunday of July, Reek Sunday, ascending the rocky slope as penitential practice, following Patrick's example of mountain prayer and fasting. The climb up Patrick is demanding. Loose scree, steep gradients, Irish weather that can turn vicious without warning. Yet on Reek Sunday, the mountain swarms with pilgrims, many barefoot, climbing in faith and penance, seeking blessing and spiritual renewal. At the summit, Mass is celebrated, the Eucharist offered on this peak, where Patrick supposedly banished snakes from Ireland, where Christian faith and Celtic spirituality meet. The Alps contain numerous Christian pilgrimage sites, including mountain shrines where apparitions of Mary are reported. Mont Blanc, Europe's highest peak, has churches and crosses at significant elevations. The practice of blessing peaks, erecting summit crosses, and conducting high-altitude religious services reflects Christian sanctification of mountain landscapes. Alpine Christianity developed unique character, priests blessing climbers before ascents, summit crosses marking peaks as Christian space, churches built in mountain villages as refuges and spiritual anchors. The mountain's danger, avalanches, storms, crevasses, made prayer natural. Mountain guides would pray before climbs, thank God for safe returns, understand themselves as moving through sacred landscape where life depended on grace as much as skill. In Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, rock-hewn churches carved into mountainsides represent remarkable synthesis of mountain sanctity and Christian worship. Lalabella's churches, carved from solid rock in the 12th century, create New Jerusalem in Ethiopian highlands. These churches are pilgrimage destinations, their mountain setting contributing to their holiness. Lalabella's churches astonish. Entire structures carved downward from mountain rock, creating buildings that are part of the mountain itself. Priests and pilgrims descend through rock-hewn tunnels, emerge into church interiors that are caves transformed into sacred space. The mountain is both container and material, both setting and structure. This architecture embodies theological truth. The sacred emerges from earth itself, divine presence made manifest in stone. The tradition of hermitages on Christian sacred mountains continues today, with individual hermits choosing mountain solitude for intensive prayer. These hermits, following ancient tradition, live in simple cells or caves, dedicating themselves to contemplative prayer, their presence blessing the mountain and the world they pray for from their heights. Modern hermits on Christian sacred mountains maintain ancient tradition, rising before dawn for prayer, spending hours in silence, living simply on minimal resources. Their lives seem impractical, unproductive by worldly standards. Yet they understand themselves as serving essential function, prayer sustaining the world, intercession for humanity, witness to values beyond material success. The mountain supports this life, its silence and simplicity, creating optimal conditions for unceasing prayer. The concept of thin places in Celtic Christianity, locations where the veil between physical and spiritual realms is especially permeable, often includes mountain locations. These mountains aren't just settings for spiritual experience, but active participants, places where divine presence is more easily sensed, where prayer becomes more powerful, where transformation occurs more readily. Celtic Christians understood some places as naturally more open to spiritual reality, where heaven and earth touch more closely, where the divine more easily breaks through. Mountains often qualify as thin places, their height, their demanding nature, their beauty all contributing to their special character. To visit such mountains is to enter space where spiritual laws apply more obviously, where God feels nearer, where the soul more easily recognizes its true home. Indigenous and shamanic sacred mountains. For indigenous peoples worldwide, mountains often represent ancestors, deities, or sacred beings deserving respect and offerings. These aren't metaphorical relationships, but literal kinship. Mountains as relatives who require honoring, who watch over communities, who must be approached with proper protocols. This understanding transforms climbing from recreational activity to relational encounter. You don't conquer a mountain that is your ancestor. You visit with respect, bringing offerings, asking permission, maintaining proper behavior. The mountain knows you, watches you, judges your intentions. Success in climbing depends not just on skill, but on relationship, on having honored the mountain properly. Uluru, Ayers Rock, in Australia is sacred to the Ananga people, who have maintained spiritual relationship with this massive sandstone formation for tens of thousands of years. The rock's surface is covered with sacred sites, each connected to Dreamtime stories. Ananga people traditionally discourage climbing, viewing it as disrespectful to a sacred being. Uluru's spiritual significance runs deeper than most people realize. Every cave, every marking, every feature connects to ancient stories, to creation events, to ancestral beings. For Anangu, Uluru isn't an object, but a living ancestor, and climbing it is like climbing on a person, obviously disrespectful. Recent closure of the climb, 2019, represents return to proper relationship, where indigenous knowledge determines how sacred places are treated. In Andean cultures, the apis, mountain spirits or deities, are central to spiritual life. Major peaks like Azangate, Sakante, and Veronica are living beings with personalities, preferences, and power. Shamans, Pacos, make offerings to apis, seeking their blessing for communities, conducting ceremonies on mountain slopes and peaks. Andean people live in intimate relationship with their mountains. Each peak has character, history, preferences for certain offerings. Apis can bless or curse, bring rain or withhold it, protect communities or allow harm. Shamans maintain these relationships through offerings, coca leaves, chicha, animal sacrifice, through ceremonies at sacred sites, through ongoing communication with mountain spirits. The mountains aren't background scenery, but family members, powerful relatives requiring attention and respect. Mount Shasta in California is sacred to several Native American tribes and has become important in New Age spirituality. Native traditions recognize the mountain as dwelling place of spirits, requiring respectful approach. Modern spiritual seekers are drawn to Shasta's reputation as energy center, creating sometimes problematic overlay of indigenous and New Age perspectives. The layering of spiritual meanings on Shasta creates complex situation. For Winnemem Wintu and other tribes, the mountain is sacred ancestral site, place of power requiring proper protocols. For New Agers, it's energy vortex, place of cosmic significance, portal to higher dimensions. These perspectives don't always align respectfully. The tension illustrates challenge of sacred places in pluralistic world, how to honor indigenous primacy while allowing others spiritual connection. Devil's Tower in Wyoming, known as Bear Lodge or Tree Rock in various Native American languages, is sacred to many Plains tribes. Lakota, Cheyenne, and other nations have creation stories, ceremonial practices, and deep spiritual connections to this unusual rock formation. The name Devil's Tower, imposed by Anglo settlers, conflicts with indigenous understanding of this profoundly sacred place. The name controversy illustrates colonial spiritual violence. Indigenous people's sacred site renamed for devil, literally demonizing what they held holy. For Lakota and other tribes, this rock formation is where sacred ceremonies occur, where vision quests are performed, where connection to spirit world is particularly strong. The site's spiritual power hasn't diminished despite colonial naming, but the imposed name reflects disrespect that continues to wound. In Hawaiian tradition, Mauna Kea is sacred as dwelling place of gods, particularly important in creation stories and as connection point between earth and sky. Traditional protocols require respect, offerings, and proper behavior when ascending. Recent conflicts over telescope construction on the summit reflect ongoing tension between indigenous spiritual values and scientific interests. Mauna Kea's summit is realm of gods, place too sacred for casual access. Traditional kapu, taboo, limited who could go there and under what circumstances. Modern conflicts over astronomy facilities represent clash of worldviews. Scientific seeing the mountain as optimal telescope location versus indigenous seeing it as sacred being whose summit shouldn't be developed. This isn't anti-science, but different understanding of what's sacred, what should be preserved and violate. Shamanic practices across cultures often include mountain journeys as part of initiation, healing, or vision questing. Shamans ascend mountains to communicate with spirits, receive visions, gain power. The physical challenge of mountain ascent parallels spiritual journey, the altitude and difficulty creating conditions where ordinary consciousness gives way to visionary states. For shamans, mountains are portals, their heights reaching towards spirit realm, their isolation creating space for encounter with non-human powers. A shaman might climb to mountain cave for days of fasting and prayer, seeking vision that will guide healing work. The mountain tests worthiness, strips away pretense, creates crisis that can break through to visionary consciousness. The journey returns the shaman changed, empowered, carrying blessing or teaching for the community. The practice of leaving offerings at mountain sites spans indigenous cultures worldwide. Tobacco, corn, precious objects, prayers placed at specific locations. These offerings maintain relationship with mountain spirits, ensure safe passage, show respect and gratitude. The sites of offering accumulate spiritual power over generations of such practice. Offering practices vary by culture, but share common understanding. Relationship with sacred places requires reciprocity. You don't just take beauty, power, blessing without giving. Simple offerings, tobacco at the trailhead, cornmeal scattered on the summit, prayer ties left at sacred sites, maintain this reciprocity. Over time, certain sites become heavily layered with offerings and prayer, their spiritual power intensified through generations of devotion. The concept of the mountain as world center appears in many indigenous cosmologies. The place from which creation began, the axis connecting upper and lower worlds, the navel of the earth. Each culture identifies specific mountains as their cosmic center, creating geography where spiritual and physical maps align. These world center mountains aren't arbitrary designations, but emerge from deep cultural relationship with specific places. For people, their world center mountain is where they came from, where their stories begin, where earth and sky meet. It's simultaneously geographical feature and mythological location, actual place you can visit and cosmic center you carry in consciousness. This dual nature, physical and spiritual, makes such mountains ultimately sacred. Mountains in art, poetry and culture. Mountains have inspired art across all cultures. Chinese landscape painting tradition devoted centuries to capturing mountain essence. Japanese artists made Fuji iconic. European romantic painters found an Alps subject of sublime beauty. Sacred mountains appear repeatedly in art because they embody spiritual aspiration, natural magnificence, and transcendent mystery. When artists paint sacred mountains, they're attempting something almost impossible, capturing on flat surface the three-dimensional majesty, spiritual power, atmospheric complexity of these peaks. Chinese masters understood that painting mountains wasn't about realistic depiction, but about conveying mountains' qi, its essential spirit. A mountain painting should communicate not just how the mountain looks, but how it feels, what it teaches, the spiritual presence it embodies. Poetry about sacred mountains spans millennia and cultures. Chinese poets like Li Bai and Wang Wei wrote thousands of mountain poems. Japanese haiku masters created verses about Fuji. Romantic poets like Wordsworth and Shelley found in mountains metaphors for spiritual aspiration and divine presence. These poems preserve mountain experiences, creating verbal maps of spiritual geography. Mountain poems often try to express the inexpressible, how standing on a summit feels, what happens to consciousness at altitude, the way mountain beauty breaks open the heart. The best mountain poetry doesn't just describe, but evokes, creating in readers something of the experience itself. Reading Li Bai's mountain poems, you feel the mountain's presence, sense the poet's ecstatic communion with peak and sky and infinite space. The tradition of mountain literature includes pilgrim accounts, climbing narratives, spiritual reflections on mountain experience. These texts preserve centuries of mountain encounters, documenting not just routes and conditions, but spiritual experiences, transformations, insights gained at altitude. They create literary tradition as long and varied as the mountains themselves. From medieval pilgrimage accounts to modern climbing memoirs, mountain literature records human engagement with these powerful places. Some texts are technical, route descriptions, difficulty ratings. Others are philosophical, using mountain experience to explore consciousness, mortality, meaning. Together, they form library of mountain wisdom, each generation adding its voice to ongoing conversation between humans and peaks. Sacred mountains appear in mythology and folklore worldwide, often as homes of gods, places of cosmic events, or sites of heroes' trials. These stories aren't just entertainment, but cultural memory, encoding spiritual understanding of mountains and preserving traditional knowledge about approaching these powerful places. Mythological mountains exist in story space, but point toward real mountains and real experiences. When Greek myth places gods on Olympus, it's teaching that divinity dwells in high places, that approaching the sacred requires ascent, that some realms remain beyond ordinary access. When Native American stories tell of mountain spirits, they're encoding real relationship with actual places, teaching proper protocols through narrative. Music inspired by sacred mountains ranges from traditional chants and ceremonies performed on mountains to classical compositions, devotional songs, and contemporary pieces. The sounds produced on mountains, echoes, wind, silence, have unique quality, and many traditions incorporate these natural acoustics into ritual practice. Mountain acoustics create unique sonic environment. Sound carries differently in thin air, echoes differently off rock faces, interacts with wind and space in ways flatland sound doesn't. Tibetan horns blown from monasteries, Japanese temple bells heard across valleys, chants echoing in mountain caves, all use mountain acoustics as part of spiritual practice. The mountain participates in the music, adding its own voice through echo and resonance. Architecture on sacred mountains, temples, monasteries, shrines, even modern visitor centers, must engage with challenging terrain, altitude, weather. The resulting structures often become iconic, their relationship to mountain landscape creating aesthetic as important as the buildings themselves. This architecture must honor the sacred while serving practical needs. Building on sacred mountains requires different approach than ordinary construction. The mountain's power must be acknowledged, its sacredness respected. Architecture should enhance rather than compete with natural beauty, integrate with landscape rather than dominate it. The best mountain architecture seems to grow from the peak itself. Chinese temple pavilions cantilevered over cliffs, Japanese shrines nestled among trees, Tibetan monasteries that from distance look like natural rock formations. Photography of sacred mountains, from early expeditions to contemporary digital images, creates visual record while raising questions about appropriate representation of sacred places. Some traditions prohibit photographing certain sites, others welcome documentation. The relationship between photography and pilgrimage continues evolving. Photography democratizes mountain experience. People who can't physically travel to Everest or Kailash can still see them, appreciate their beauty. Yet something is lost: the physical challenge, the spiritual preparation, the transformation that happens through difficult journey. Photos can inspire pilgrimage, but can also substitute for it, creating second-hand spirituality. The best mountain photography honors sacredness while sharing beauty, creating images that invite rather than replace direct experience. Film and documentary about sacred mountains, from early expedition films to modern documentaries, preserve mountain experiences and spiritual practices. These visual records capture what still images and words cannot. Movement, change, the dynamic quality of mountain weather and light, the embodied experience of pilgrimage and climb. Mountain documentaries at their best do more than show beautiful scenery. They convey the difficulty of altitude, the strain of climbing, the psychological challenge of dangerous terrain. They document spiritual practices, preserve vanishing traditions, make visible what's usually hidden: monastery interiors, secret ceremonies, the daily life of mountain dwellers. These films become cultural records, teaching resources, inspirations for future pilgrims and practitioners. The concept of mountain aesthetics, the particular form of beauty sense of the sublime, spiritual response that mountains evoke has been analyzed by philosophers, theologians, and artists. Mountains offer specific type of beauty, vast, powerful, indifferent to human concerns, inspiring both terror and exaltation. Mountains evoke what Edmund Burke called the sublime, beauty mixed with terror, magnificence that exceeds human scale, power that could destroy us yet captivates us. Standing before a massive peak, we feel simultaneously insignificant and elevated, diminished by scale, yet expanded by connection to something vast. This paradoxical response, feeling small, yet somehow more truly ourselves, characterizes mountain aesthetics across cultures. The beauty isn't pretty or comfortable, but terrible in the old sense, inspiring awe and holy fear. Modern challenges in conservation. Sacred mountains face unprecedented challenges in modern era. Mass tourism, environmental degradation, climate change, commercial development. Places that once saw a handful of pilgrims annually now host thousands or millions, creating impact on fragile mountain ecosystems and testing traditional sacred site management. The democratization of mountain access brings benefits. More people experiencing these powerful places, but also costs. Trails erode under heavy traffic. Litter accumulates at high camps. Sacred sites become crowded, their quiet destroyed. Traditional protocols break down when visitors don't understand or respect them. Finding balance between access and preservation, between tourism and sacredness, remains an ongoing challenge. Climate change particularly affects sacred mountains, with glaciers retreating, permafrost melting, weather patterns shifting. For traditions that see mountains as living beings or divine presences, these changes aren't just environmental, but spiritual crises. The very geography of the sacred is changing, challenging traditional understandings and practices. When sacred glaciers disappear, it's not just loss of ice, but loss of divine presence. Communities that relied on glacier-fed streams for sacred water watch their sources vanish. Pilgrimage routes become impassable as terrain shifts. The mountain you knew and honored is changing faster than human timescales usually witness, creating spiritual as well as practical crisis. How do you maintain tradition when the sacred landscape itself is transforming? Conservation efforts on sacred mountains must balance environmental protection with respect for traditional spiritual practices and indigenous sovereignty. International environmental organizations sometimes clash with local religious communities over how mountains should be managed, who has authority, what activities should be allowed. A mountain may be UNESCO World Heritage Site, National Park, Indigenous Sacred Site, and tourism destination simultaneously. Each designation brings different priorities, different management approaches. Scientists want to study, conservationists want to protect, religious practitioners want to conduct ceremonies, tourism industry wants access. Finding approaches that honor all legitimate interests requires genuine dialogue, mutual respect, willingness to prioritize sacred values over purely economic or even environmental concerns. The commercialization of sacred mountains, guided climbs as profit-driven enterprise, development of tourism infrastructure, commodification of spiritual practices, raises ethical questions about appropriate relationship with these places. When climbing Everest costs $100,000 and creates enormous environmental impact, is it still sacred journey or consumer experience? There's valid tension here. Making mountains accessible allows more people to benefit from these powerful places. Yet something is lost when pilgrimage becomes package tour, when sacred site becomes photo opportunity, when mountain is climbed for bragging rights rather than spiritual seeking. How to maintain sacredness in era of mass tourism. How to honor mountains while making them accessible. These questions lack easy answers. Indigenous communities reasserting rights over sacred mountains represents important contemporary development. Legal cases, cultural campaigns, and political action aim to restore indigenous authority over places colonialism appropriated. Success varies, but movement is clear. Indigenous peoples reclaiming spiritual sovereignty over their sacred sites. Examples include return of Devil's Tower to indigenous management protocols, Uluru Climb closure honoring Ananga wishes, Mauna Kea protection efforts by Native Hawaiians. These represent larger pattern. Indigenous people saying, these are our sacred sites. Our relationship with them predates colonial appropriation. We have right and responsibility to determine how they're treated. This reassertion of authority is justice, returning what should never have been taken. Environmental activism increasingly recognizes sacred mountains as deserving protection not just for environmental reasons, but for spiritual significance. Some conservation efforts are led by religious communities, some by indigenous peoples, others by interfaith coalitions recognizing that protecting sacred geography serves multiple values simultaneously. When Buddhist monks lead tree planting campaigns on sacred mountains, when indigenous communities fight pipeline development threatening sacred peaks, when interfaith groups protest ski resort expansion on sacred sites, these represent convergence of environmental and spiritual concerns. The mountain deserves protection both as ecosystem and as sacred being. These twin values reinforce each other, creating stronger bases for conservation than either alone. The question of appropriate technology on sacred mountains, cell towers, weather stations, astronomical observatories, communication infrastructure, creates ongoing debates. Some see such development as desecration, others as compatible with mountain sacredness. Different traditions and communities answer differently. Is a telescope on a sacred mountain's summit compatible with its sacredness? Depends who you ask. Some say scientific exploration honors creation, seeks truth, respects mountain by learning from it. Others say summit should remain inviolate, that building anything there is disrespect, that some places must be preserved untouched. The debate reveals different understandings of sacred. One seeing knowledge-seeking as sacred activity, others seeing preservation as highest honor. Social media's impact on sacred mountains proves complex, increasing awareness and access while sometimes creating harmful behavior. Images inspire pilgrimage, but also ego-driven climbing, summit selfies that trivialize sacred experience, overcrowding of formerly quiet sites. The digital age changes relationship with mountains in unprecedented ways. Instagram photos of sacred mountains can inspire genuine spiritual seeking. Someone sees Kailash, feels called to pilgrimage, begins authentic spiritual journey. But social media also reduces mountains to backdrops for personal branding, encourages risky behavior for dramatic photos, creates crowds at specific Instagrammable locations while other areas are ignored. The technology is neutral. How we use it determines whether it serves or harms our relationship with sacred places. Despite challenges, sacred mountains continue attracting seekers, pilgrims, and spiritual practitioners. The human need for encounter with transcendence through mountain ascent appears undiminished. Modern pilgrims walk ancient paths, traditional practices continue, new relationships with sacred mountains form. The tradition adapts, evolves, but endures. This is perhaps most hopeful fact. Despite everything, commercialization, climate change, overcrowding, cultural conflict, people still climb sacred mountains seeking God, seeking enlightenment, seeking transformation. The mountains still call, still teach, still offer what they've always offered: height, difficulty, beauty, presence that exceeds ordinary experience. As long as humans exist, there will be those who answer the mountain's call. Personal practice and pilgrimage. Preparation for sacred mountain pilgrimage across traditions involves physical training, but also spiritual preparation, prayer, purification, sometimes fasting, receiving blessing from teachers or elders. This preparation recognizes that approaching sacred mountains requires readiness of spirit, as well as body. You don't just show up at a sacred mountain and start climbing. Traditional pilgrimage involves months of preparation, getting body strong enough, but also purifying heart, clarifying intention, receiving instruction and proper protocols. The preparation is part of the pilgrimage, the journey beginning long before you reach the trailhead. This time of preparation creates mental and spiritual space for what the mountain will teach. The practice of circumambulation, walking around rather than climbing, appears across traditions, recognizing that honoring sacred mountains doesn't require summit. Tibetan pilgrims circle Kailash, Hindu devotees walk around Aranakula, Shinto practitioners circuit sacred peaks in Japan. The circuit itself is sacred journey, completion of wholeness. Circumambulation offers different relationship with mountain than climbing. Instead of conquering, you honor. Instead of reaching the top, you complete a circle. You see the mountain from all sides, experience its changing aspects, walk the boundary between sacred and mundane. Each step is prayer, each completion a cycle of practice. Some people spend years doing repeated circuits, the mountain becoming intimate companion rather than one-time achievement. Solo pilgrimage to sacred mountains, undertaken alone rather than in groups, creates particular intensity of experience. Without companions, your dialogue is directly with the mountain, with yourself, with whatever divine presence you seek. This solitude can be frightening, but also powerfully transformative. Walking alone to a sacred mountain, you encounter yourself without mediation. The thoughts that arise, the fears, the joys, the insights, all emerge more clearly without group dynamics diluting them. The mountain speaks more directly to solitary pilgrim. Not everyone should undertake solo pilgrimage. It requires self-knowledge, good judgment, proper preparation. But for those called to it, the experience can be uniquely profound. Group pilgrimage creates different dynamic, shared experience, mutual support, collective energy. Pilgrims encourage each other through difficult passages, pray together, share insights and struggles. The group becomes temporary community, bound by shared intention and experience, often forming lasting connections. There's power in climbing together. When you're exhausted, someone encourages you. When another struggles, you offer help. The group's collective intention creates a field of devotion larger than any individual could generate. Praying together on the summit, sharing meals at base camp, walking in silence as a group. These create bonds and experiences impossible alone. Different from solo pilgrimage, not better or worse, but its own valid path. The practice of leaving prayers, offerings, or tokens at sacred mountain sites allows pilgrims to participate in ongoing devotional tradition. Prayer flags in Tibet, stones added to cairns, offerings left at shrines. These physical acts connect individual pilgrims to a chain of devotion stretching back centuries or millennia. When you tie prayer flag to string with thousands of others, you're participating in practice older than you can imagine. Wind carries your prayers as it has carried countless others. The flags fade and fray, prayers released into the universe. Your stone added to the cairn rests with stones placed by pilgrims centuries ago. These simple acts connect you temporally to all who've come before and spatially to the mountain itself, making your individual pilgrimage part of a vast ongoing relationship. Keeping pilgrimage journal or record serves multiple purposes: personal remembrance, teaching others, contributing to historical record. Many famous pilgrimage accounts began as personal journals. Recording your experience helps process it, honor it, share it with those who cannot make the journey themselves. Writing about sacred mountain experience while it's happening or shortly after captures details you'll forget, preserves intensity of feeling, helps process what happened. Years later, reading your journal, you recovered not just facts but emotional and spiritual truth of the experience. And if you share it, you help others understand what sacred mountain pilgrimage means, perhaps inspiring their own journeys. The practice of silence during sacred mountain ascent, common in many traditions, allows deeper listening to the mountain, to one's interior life, to whatever spiritual presence one seeks. Silence creates space for encounter that conversation often fills. Many pilgrims report that silent portions of pilgrimage were most transformative. Try climbing in silence. No talking, just walking, breathing, noticing. The mind chatters initially, but gradually quiets. You hear birds, wind, your own footsteps with new clarity. The mountain's presence becomes more palpable. Interior insights arise that conversation would crowd out. Silence isn't refusing to speak, but creating receptive space, practicing attentive presence. Return from sacred mountain pilgrimage involves reintegration challenge, bringing mountain experience into ordinary life, maintaining insights gained at altitude, honoring what you learned without clinging to peak experiences. The mountain transforms you, but you must live that transformation in the valley. This is hard part. On the mountain, everything feels clear, significant, charged with meaning. You have insights, make vows, feel completely transformed. Then you return to ordinary life, job, family, mundane concerns, and wonder if the mountain experience was real or just altitude-induced euphoria. The work is integration, bringing mountain clarity into valley complexity, letting transformation become lived reality, not just memory. The understanding that sacred mountains are not just destinations but teachers, offering lessons through their difficulty, beauty, danger, and majesty, appears across traditions. What the mountain teaches varies by person and circumstance, but the teaching is real. Paying attention to what the mountain offers is an essential aspect of pilgrimage. Mountains teach different lessons to different people. One person learns humility. The mountain dwarfs ego, makes pretensions laughable. Another learns perseverance, step by step despite exhaustion. Someone else learns beauty, aesthetic experience that opens the heart. Another encounters fear and learns courage. The mountain isn't passive object, but active teacher, offering precisely what each pilgrim needs if they're paying attention. Sacred mountains today and tomorrow. Sacred mountains in contemporary world serve multiple functions: active pilgrimage sites, conservation areas, tourism destinations, indigenous territories, scientific research locations. Managing these overlapping interests and values represents ongoing challenge and opportunity. A place like Mount Fuji exemplifies this complexity. Shinto sacred site, Buddhist pilgrimage mountain, UNESCO World Heritage Site, national park, tourist attraction, climbing challenge, iconic national symbol. Managing all these identities requires sophistication, flexibility, and willingness to prioritize spiritual and environmental values when they conflict with commercial interests. Interfaith mountain pilgrimages, where people of different religious traditions climb together, create new forms of mountain spirituality. These journeys recognize shared reverence for sacred peaks while respecting different ways of understanding mountain sacredness. Imagine Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus climbing together, each following their own traditions, each respecting others' practices, praying differently but to the same summit. This interfaith approach doesn't blend traditions into generic spirituality, but honors particularity while recognizing common ground. We all recognize mountains as sacred. We all seek transcendence through ascent. We all know mountains as powerful places of transformation. Virtual pilgrimages to sacred mountains, using video, VR, online tours, create new access for those unable to travel physically. While not replacing actual pilgrimage, these technologies allow elderly, disabled, or economically limited people to engage with sacred mountains in ways previously impossible. Technology creates complicated opportunities. A 90-year-old who made pilgrimage to Kailash in youth but can no longer travel can now revisit, through VR, recovering precious memories, feeling again the mountain's presence. Someone too poor to afford journey can still see, learn, develop relationship with mountain. This isn't same as physical presence, but it's not nothing. Used wisely, technology can democratize access while respecting the irreplaceable value of actual pilgrimage. Youth engagement with sacred mountains through educational programs, environmental camps, and cultural initiatives helps ensure tradition continues to future generations. Teaching young people about sacred mountains, their spiritual significance, environmental importance, cultural meanings, creates stewards for the future. Children who learn that mountains are sacred, who hear stories of pilgrimage, who understand indigenous relationships with peaks, who experience mountain beauty directly. These children grow into adults who care about protecting these places. Education isn't indoctrination, but opening doorways. Here's why mountains matter. Here's what they've meant to humans across history. Here's what they might mean to you. The recognition of mountains as sentient beings or holders of rights in some legal systems represents revolutionary development. New Zealand granted personhood to Mount Taranaki. Ecuador's constitution recognizes nature's rights. These legal innovations align with indigenous understandings while creating new frameworks for mountain protection. When law recognizes a mountain as person with rights, everything changes. You can't simply exploit it, develop it, pollute it without legal consequence. The mountain has standing, can be represented in court, has legal personhood. This sounds radical to Western legal tradition, but merely recognizes what indigenous peoples have always known. Mountains are beings, not resources, relatives, not property. The role of sacred mountains in climate activism grows as these highly visible, spiritually significant places show climate change impacts clearly. Retreating glaciers on sacred peaks become powerful symbols, motivating both spiritual and practical responses to environmental crisis. When glacier that thousands have venerated for millennia disappears within a generation, the spiritual and practical crises converge. Religious leaders speak out, pilgrims witness change directly, communities lose sacred water sources. Mountains become witnesses to climate crisis, their changing faces calling for action. Their sacredness adds moral weight to environmental arguments. This isn't just ice melting, but sacred beings suffering. The practice of mountain yoga or outdoor meditation on mountains combines contemporary wellness culture with ancient spiritual practices. While sometimes commercialized, at best these practices connect modern seekers with timeless mountain spirituality, introducing contemplative practice in mountain settings. Yes, sunrise yoga on sacred mountain can be commodified wellness tourism, but it can also be genuine spiritual practice. People learning to meditate in mountain environment, experiencing how altitude and beauty support contemplative awareness, connecting with traditions that have used mountains for spiritual development for millennia. The key is approaching with respect, understanding, proper protocols rather than just Instagram aesthetics. Stories and teachings from sacred mountains continue evolving as new generations encounter these peaks and bring contemporary perspectives, questions, and insights. The tradition isn't static but living, each era adding its understanding to accumulated wisdom. Every generation climbs sacred mountains with their particular questions, concerns, consciousness. Medieval pilgrims asked different questions than modern ones. Contemporary seekers bring ecological awareness, interfaith openness, technological capacities earlier pilgrims lacked. The mountains respond to each generation, teaching what that era needs. The tradition stays alive precisely by evolving while maintaining essential continuity. The universal human response to mountains, awe, reverence, sense of the sacred, transcends particular traditions while expressing through them. Whether you call the mountain Shiva, Guanyin, Apu, Olympian dwelling, or simply sacred, the fundamental recognition remains constant. These places are special, powerful, deserving of respect and wonder. This is perhaps deepest truth. Mountains evoke sacred response in humans across all cultures, all times. Something in us recognizes mountain as more than geology, as presence, as power, as teacher. Different traditions name and understand this differently, but the fundamental encounter, human meeting mountain, spirit recognizing spirit, remains constant across our species' history. And finally, the invitation mountains extend to each of us remains open. You don't need to climb Everest or circle Kailash to receive mountain blessing. Any mountain, approached with respect and open heart, offers what sacred mountains have always offered: elevation, perspective, beauty, difficulty that strengthens, silence that teaches, presence that transforms. The question isn't whether mountains are sacred. They are, but whether you'll answer their call. And so our journey through sacred mountains comes to rest, right here, in this quiet moment, breathing, aware. Perhaps tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you'll dream of mountains. Snow-covered peaks against blue sky, stone temples on rocky slopes, pilgrims walking ancient paths. Or perhaps you'll simply rest, held by the knowledge that these places exist, sacred mountains rising across our beautiful earth, waiting for those who seek them, offering what they've always offered: height, beauty, challenge, transformation. May you find your own sacred mountain, in whatever form it takes. May you climb with respect and open heart. May the mountains bless you. Rest now. Simply rest, perhaps on a mountain slope in your imagination, breathing the thin, clean air, seeing vast distances, feeling small and significant simultaneously, at peace. Good night.